Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Jeremy. But most importantly, today we are joined by Dr. Justin Coulson, an Australian parenting expert, father of 6, author of 10 books on parenting, co-host of Channel 9's Parental Guidance, and co-host of the Happy Families podcast with his wife, Kylie. Justin also holds a PhD in psychology and has become one of Australia's most trusted voices on parenting, family life, and child development.
Through Justin's books, podcasts, and work with families across Australia, Justin has helped reshape the way we think about connection, discipline, emotional development, and what young people actually need to thrive. Dr. Justin Coulson, thank you for joining the Big Bros podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks a lot. It's great to be with you. I'm just stoked to have this conversation.
As we are too. We've been admirers of your work from afar for some time, and we thought it'd be great to tee up a chat with you and talk about some topics that, Jeremy and I are both young men in our mid to late 20s, and these are topics that we speak a lot about in our friendship groups, in pop culture. There's a lot of commentary about men, and something that we try to do with this podcast is, be positive male role models. And something we've noticed, and we want to get your insight on this, is from your work with boys and families, what do you think young men need but aren't getting?
So basically what they need is an understanding of what it is to be a healthy man. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that I can share this with you. So the first thing that jumps out at me is that too many boys are trying to be the man, and what we actually want them to do is try to be a man, right? Like when you're trying to be the man, you're about saving face or looking like the big guy. It's all about status. It's about looking good. Whereas when you're trying to be a man, you have a completely different orientation to the people around you. Whenever I hear people talking about toxic masculinity, what I'm basically hearing is there's too many people who are trying to be the man. At its core, the people who are working in this area the most right now, they're actually starting to stop talking about toxic masculinity. It's not a helpful conversation. Fundamentally, when I start talking about toxic masculinity, every guy feels lousy about himself and every girl looks at guys as a problem. That doesn't get you anywhere. We need to talk about healthy masculinity and have models for that. The metaphor that I use, I don't know if do you ride a motorcycle or a bicycle or a surfboard? Okay, so you're shaking your head and going, no, I don't ride any of that. So
we're not that cool.
I ride all
bicycles, yes, maybe not a motorcycle, but yes.
Oh, I don't know if it's cool, but I do all of those things. And there's this reality when you're on a motorbike. I'll use a motorbike or a bicycle. That's probably the easiest. There's this thing that happens where you go where you're looking. And so if you're taking a corner and you start to get a little bit wobbly and think, oh no, I'm going too fast in the corner, what will often happen is you'll start looking where you're headed, right? You look towards the side of the road, maybe the ditch, maybe the telegraph pole. And the great irony there is as you look at it, that's what you go towards. And people who are really a little bit more experienced at riding a motorcycle or a push bike, as they're going around that corner, instead of looking where they're going, they lift their head up and they look through the corner. They look to the right or they look to the left. They look down the street. They look where they want to go, not where they are going. And as a result, the bike almost automatically follows. Because where you're going, then your shoulder and your hands follow, and then you steer the bike in the right direction. There's some other fancy stuff like counter steering that are probably not relevant for our conversation right now. But basically, when we talk about masculinity, too much of the conversation is focused on where we've been going or where we are going. And we end up going wherever we're looking. That is, we keep on hitting the telegraph pole. So now that I've mentioned that, I don't want to talk about toxic masculinity again for the rest of the conversation. I want to talk about healthy masculinity. And my definition of a healthy man, healthy masculinity. If you're a healthy guy, you're the kind of person who helps the people around you feel safer and stronger. Like when you show up as somebody who is a giver, not a taker. You show up as someone who can use your size and your strength and your capacity to rule the room in such a way that you lift others, you elevate others, you add value. And I got this idea originally. I read Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men. He talks a lot about surplus value. And I liked the idea. For me, what resonated was this. I took that and thought, surplus value, look for the chair stackers, right? Like at the end of every event, there's work to be done. And there are some guys who stand around and talk in the corner, or they get a ball and they start throwing it around the car park. And there are some guys who are like, someone should stack the chairs and put the rubbish away. Let me do that. To me, that's showing up with and giving more than you take. That's surplus value. But I had this chat with a 42, 43-year-old woman, colleague of mine. We'd known each other for a while. We had a good, close personal relationship. It wasn't inappropriate of me to ask her what was going on in her life. She'd recently been through a divorce, and I was asking, are you on the dating apps? Are you looking for a new guy? Her response, it just took me back. She just said, no, because every guy that I've met on an app and every guy that I've met in a club or at a bar is not looking for a partner. They're looking for another mother. They want somebody who's going to cook for them, someone who's going to clean for them, somebody who's going to direct their lives. And she said, I don't want that. And then she said this great line. She said, I want a guy who's going to show up in my life as a bonus. And I was just like, oh, that's I love this. But more than anything, I used to have a radio career before I went back to school and got all my qualifications and credentials in psychology. And my mind kind of instantly looks for the quick gag. And I looked at her and I'm like, so you want a guy who's going to show up as a bonus? And she's like, that's right. And I'm like, why don't you put that on your Tinder profile? Show me your bonus. And which led to a very big lot of laughter. You guys aren't laughing as hard as I thought you'd laugh. Like, can you imagine the messages you're going to get if you're a woman and you say, show me your bonus on your Tinder profile?
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the affirmation. That was fun. You're laughing on the inside, I can tell.
We're laughing on the inside.
And so the whole concept in my mind, so there's a guy called Dr. Arna Rubinstein. He wrote a book called The Making of Men. He talks about boy psychology and man psychology. And boy psychology is about dog eat dog. You take whatever you can. It's all about taking. It's all about needing to be cared for. Man psychology is when you shift from taker to giver. It's when you move into provider and protector, not in some coercive or dominating way, but rather my job is to add value to your life. And I'm going to do that because I am going to go out and bring home the bacon. And I am going to stick my hands in the sink and do the dishes or cook a meal or look after the kids because I can and because I want to, because I care about you and I want to make your life better. It's not about martyrdom. It's not about slavery. It's not about, I don't know, feminism run wild or anything like that. It's just about being a contributor. That's what real men do.
Something that you spoke about there that I can't help but it's sitting with me. And the reason it's sitting with me is a lot of these actions and behaviors are representative of what you could say some are typical male gender roles. And it almost seems like in the current climate, when we're talking about what makes meaningful and fulfilling relationships, those roles are somewhat demonized. And I find that even when we try and reintroduce this idea of having someone in a relationship that is able to take on those roles and and they are creating surplus value, it's almost, and maybe this is kind of criticized by certain factions, maybe certain factions of the left, but there's this insistence to demonize and say, well, no, well, that's just going back into the Stone Age. You know, if a man's the one who's, taking leadership and he's the commander of the family, well, that's not necessarily helping progress. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about that.
So it's really important that what I've said isn't misconstrued. I haven't said that the father or the man of the house has to step in as the leader and the commander of the family. And I haven't said that we need to go back to the 1950s. What I've said is that men, their central role is to provide and protect. I haven't said women can't also provide, nor have I said that women are incapable of looking after themselves. So let's get a little bit of context here and also have a look at some stats. First off, if you just look at the sociological and anthropological evidence, historically, if you were a man in a tribe or in a village or in a city, your job was literally to provide and protect. And if you didn't, you're kind of not a very useful man. In fact, you did not earn your masculinity and therefore you would be ostracized and cast out. You weren't seen as a man, which is pretty full on compared to what we do today. And so if the town was going to war, if the village was being attacked, your job as a man was to protect the women. Why? Well, this is a horrible thing to say, but men are expendable relative to women, right? Like if only 5 women survive, but you lose all of your men except 2 or 3, or let me rephrase. Let's say that the whole village of women survives, but you've only got 5 men left because everyone gets wiped out. You can repopulate that village. But if you've only got 5 women and all the men, that's not going to help. You're not repopulating that village at all. That's not going to work. men would go off and they'd slay the lion, they'd catch the fish, they would bring down the woolly mammoth. And I know I'm sort of going into ancient prehistoric days here, but that's always right up until the last couple of 100 years. In fact, even in the last couple of 100 years, that's how it's been. Now, does that mean that it should be like that? I don't know, but let's have a look at the stats. What's really curious is that the push for egalitarianism can sometimes be seen as keeping men down because women are taking all the men's jobs. I completely reject that. They're actually not. What's fascinating is in the most egalitarian societies on the planet, I'm talking about Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, for example, the more egalitarian you get, curiously, the more women want to work in what have been traditionally women-focused fields, which I find fascinating. And men, they're not clamoring to get into fields that women have traditionally done. In the most egalitarian societies, that's the case. Now, here's the other part of this that really matters. You can argue against this idea as much as you want, but when you look at the stats, this is where it gets fascinating. The data shows really, really clearly that when men are looking for a potential mate, and we're talking about heterosexual couples here, obviously, they look across, and if there's a woman looking at him, he's kind of like, okay, I'm interested. Like, let's see how this will play out. Like, guys just kind of, they're not that choosy. There's opportunity here. I'm going to investigate it. Might not work out, but I'm going to give it a crack. Women, on the other hand, when they look across, they look for somebody who is at their level or higher in terms of educational outcomes, in terms of social viability, in terms of economic capacity. And what we're seeing at the moment in our society is that men are not reaching the same heights as women. We're seeing men struggling from an educational point of view. There are 44 Australian universities. Women outnumber men in 42 of those 44 universities. For every 10 women who graduate with a degree from university, about 6 men do. Loosely, you can round up or down, but give or take, it's about 6 for every 10. What that basically means is that women are looking across and they're just not seeing that many men, because they're not graduating from university. They're not well qualified like you guys are or like I am. They're seeing guys who, unfortunately, are looking for a mum. They're laying at home on the carpet, vaping and playing Fortnite or Minecraft, even though they're in their 20s. Yeah. Maybe they're playing GTA, and they're mooching off mum and dad. And they're saying, well, I need someone else's couch to sleep on or someone else's bed to sleep in. Will you please cook my meals and look after me? And women are saying, I'm not up for that, which I think is great. Like, I'm all for that. And I'm a dad to 6 daughters. So I want my girls to have every educational and career opportunity that they want if they choose it. Now, the last stat that I'll share revolves around, and this is American research, it's really hard to get good quality Australian data here, but data from the US indicates that women actually do want to work. But what's fascinating is that once they start families, they want to pull their work right back. Sometimes they do want to stop, even if it's only for the short term, but most of them want to sort of go part-time. They want to stop for a short time and then go part-time. And then as the kids get older, they want to be involved in professional work again. They want to be living their life. And we have created a society that is generally doing an okay job, although there is room to improve. But guys just aren't hitting the same level. So much so, I read a report just last week indicating that in Australia and a couple of other Western nations, the gender pay gap has almost completely disappeared. In fact, it has utterly reversed in Australia, but it also depends on how you look at the data, because some women do leave the workforce for child rearing and that kind of thing. And so that kind of skews the data in a different direction. So women are getting more middle management and senior management roles and leadership roles. Women are earning as much, if not more, than men, generally speaking. They're thriving. And so when they look across, they're like, where are the guys? And they're not willing to sacrifice. So back to your question about, am I going back to the 1950s here? No way. No way. We've made great progress. We still need to make more. And I'm really delighted, especially as a father of 6 daughters, for what that means. But if our men can't step up and do better, if we can't do something to elevate men and help them to feel like school matters and education matters and getting that trade and finishing 4th year and actually getting on and making my own business, if we can't help them to get that sense of purpose and contribution, then they're not going to do a great job providing, protecting. Yeah, it sounds a bit old school, but deal with it. That's just what it is. Then they're going to struggle to partner. And that's bad for women and it's bad for men. and it's bad for society. So our objective now, and we're seeing governments around the world, like in the UK, in the US, they're starting to step up and say the most disadvantaged group right now, believe it or not, are men. Men are struggling at school. They're struggling with mental health. They're struggling with crime. They're struggling with identity. They're struggling with purpose and meaning. They're 4 times more likely to die by suicide than are females. No matter what metric you look at, men are generally struggling at an aggregate level, and we need to help them to do better. And that's what I'm really arguing for.
Yeah, look, all of this is reminding me of a recent episode we also did with, you might have heard from George from the Tin Men. He does some brilliant work from the UK all around men and boys as well. And he said the same thing you said, which is when it comes to the stats around men, the stats are all bad. All the stats are really bad in skewing towards the negativity of men when it comes to school, education, loneliness, all of the things that we've spoken about here and that you've mentioned there. One point that I know that you've also spoken really well about, Justin, and you're quite passionate about speaking about, is the difference between when a girl becomes a woman and when a boy becomes a man. How there's that biological difference from woman to man. From from girl to woman. But when it comes to boy to man, masculinity and manhood actually needs to be earned. And then on the flip side, you actually need to be able to keep it because you can lose it. What do you mean by that? And can you explain that a bit further for us?
So when I was researching for the book, I was kind of loosely familiar with these ideas, but that's why I started to research, because I had heard about it, but I didn't really understand it. And basically, across cultures and across time, once again, we see this continual pattern of boys need to first learn their masculinity, and they learn that by watching the men around them, and hopefully they've got really good examples of masculinity around them, people who are helping the people around them feel safer and stronger, who are providing and protecting, who are giving more than they take. Like the best hunters in the ancient tribes, they would bring the catch home and then they'd say, oh, it's not really that much. They'd talk it down and then they would give it to everybody before they gave anything to themselves. Why? Because that's masculine. And they were upheld as the best hunters because they had that approach, that generosity and service-focused approach. And interestingly, because they were seen as the most manly men, they got the best opportunities in terms of the best catch from a partnering point of view and from how the tribe saw them point of view. They learned their masculinity and then they earned their masculinity. There's a researcher by the name of Jennifer Bosson out of, I think it's Florida University from memory. And she did these really interesting studies where she got men and women to participate in a task. They had to do this little cognitive task. And when they got their results back, some of the men were told, you scored on average pretty consistently with the average man. Some of the men were told that they scored on average pretty consistently with the average woman rather than the average man. So there's this threat to masculinity that they've experienced. The women were told the same. Half of them were told you scored pretty much like the average woman, and the other half were told you scored pretty much like the average man. So can we threaten femininity? You know what's really interesting about this, Jeremy? The next task that was apparently a different experiment and unrelated was to do a word completion task. So they had to finish, like there'd be a letter or two missing from a word. Like let's say you've got P-U-N, finish the word.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have punt, you could have puny, you could have punch. And what they found was that the men who felt like their masculinity was threatened consistently chose more violent words than the men who were told that they were an average male.
Wow.
Like L-O blank E-R. Are you going to go with lover? Are you going to go with lower? Or are you going to go with loser? The men who had their masculinity threatened by being told, no, you scored more like a woman, they would go with loser. They would go with punch. Whereas the other guys, they would go with the alternatives. And there was a long list of words. It wasn't just those two. There was heaps of words. And that was the consistent theme, a statistically significant finding, not chance. This is my masculinity's been threatened. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The women There was no discernible difference, no measurable difference anywhere in terms of the way they responded, regardless of whether their femininity was threatened or not. And this brings us back to the core of your question. What does it mean to be a man? We actually, in our society, whether it's healthy or not, whether it's right or not, I'm not making that argument. I'm saying this is actually how it is. I'm just describing what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
When you're a kid at school, if you don't do the masculine thing, people will perceive you as feminine, as not masculine, and you will be ostracized. And this is why boys get into and men get into what's known as the male monkey dance, which is a polite way of saying, oh yeah, you want to have a go? Yeah, have a go. Oh, go and do it. And then the poking and then the pushing starts. And neither of them really want to have a fight in most cases. Let's be honest. Like, no one's really wanted to have their jaw socked by someone else's fist. No. But it's really hard to back out of that, because if you do, then your masculinity has not just been threatened, it's been decimated. And you don't get the respect of the crowd. But what research also shows is that in the majority of cases, except for people who really do actually like fighting, and there are some guys who love to get out there and mix it up, in the majority of cases, when that happens, the two people who are involved in the push and shove, they're just praying for someone to step in and say, oh, guys, come on, break it up. Because then they both save face. Oh, you're lucky he stepped in. I would have smashed you, right? Yeah. Like, you really want. But the other fascinating thing is this only happens when there's a question of status. When your masculinity could be questioned. Like, you don't see a super high status guy walking up to the puniest guy in the playground and saying, yeah, come on, have a go. Let's see what you got. What's the point? Like, there's no, like, you're nodding immediately because you can see there's no power in that. There's no demonstration of masculinity in that. You actually look small by doing it. And so there's all of these fascinating psychological dynamics that are going on here, where guys are trying to be manly because they need to demonstrate it and they can't have it ripped away from them. Good news. A lot of guys in 2026, they're just not buying that anymore. They're just like, no, I don't have to prove anything. And I actually think that's really, really, really good and really, really healthy. But around about, depending on what data you look at, there's this group called the Man Box. They do all this research into what's going on there. You guys are nodding, you're familiar with it. And some of their data shows that somewhere around 20 to 30% of our boys and young men, they sit squarely in this man box where they think they have got to push their weight around, throw their weight around. They believe things like sometimes a girl really is asking for it, either physical violence or sex, depending on what the questions are. They believe that they've got to defend their masculinity at all costs. And unfortunately, those man box beliefs are associated with a whole lot of negative outcomes, including much more likely to be involved in sexual violence, physical violence, more likely to struggle with employment, more likely to struggle with mental health issues, more likely to attempt suicide at the really sharp, pointy end downstream. Our attitudes around masculinity are not necessarily working for us because we feel like we have got to continue to prove it. And it's not until you get to, I don't know, some people get it younger. I'm 50. I just turned 50 last year.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's a milestone. And I still will walk into a room and I'll size up the guys that are in the room. I'll be like, if he came at me, could I take him? Like, I don't know if you guys do that or not, but you kind of, depending on the room and the familiarity, you just sort of check out the other guys. How big are they? Who's a threat? Who's going to dominate this room? It's a male thing. Why? Because I don't know, it's in our genes, it's been socialized, whatever. That's just kind of what we do.
It's interesting you mention all of that because I somewhat agree with it. And I don't think I've ever actually acknowledged it on the outside because I think similar to what we were saying before, maybe there's this hesitancy to acknowledge that there are biological imperatives, there are genetic imperatives that influence how we behave. And on that as well, you mentioned that a lot of the men that are likely to commit some, atrocities, heinous acts are more likely to die by suicide. A lot of these men I find have been also failed by the system as well. And I know here in Victoria, we recently appointed a minister for boys and men. And it seems that most of the institutions that are happy to implement some sort of fundraising for men's mental health research, the way it's palatable or the way it gets funding is if it's couched in this way that it'll also benefit women too. Now, that somewhat bothers me. And the reason it bothers me is because imagine if you were to kind of go back to the 60s and 70s and say, we're only going to help women if it helps men. And I think that there needs to be some sort of fairness or some sort of, I guess, equal treatment in that regard as well, because I think a lot of men are struggling, and I think there's a lot of great research that is out there, but we're just not wanting to put the money where our mouth is. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that too.
It's really politically sensitive, and I always want to I want to tread really gently. If we help men, women will be helped. Full stop, end of story. Like, when men are struggling, you can't have half the population struggle and not have a flow on to the other half. Like, when men's mental health is low, when men are feeling hopeless and without purpose and without meaning, when men are not being productive, they are more likely to behave in either antisocial ways. Or a friend of mine, you might have heard of Rebecca Sparrow. She does a lot of work on, works with a lot of parents around teenage issues. And in 2023, November the 6th, 2023, my nephew, Logan, took his life. He died by suicide. He was 20 years old. And as I was coming to terms with what is without question the hardest and most shattering loss of my life, I was talking to Rebecca, and she said, men, this is so hard. Men they're hurting girls and women. They're hurting each other, and they're hurting themselves. And so when we establish a minister for boys and men, what we're actually saying is, let's actually help them. Because if we can improve their mental health, if we can improve their sense of purpose, if we can improve their sense of meaning, their sense of production, their sense of engagement in life, then they're less likely to hurt girls, other men, or themselves, because they're fully occupied. They're living a rich and full life, and therefore they don't feel like they are helpless and hopeless and need to lash out. I think she was so incisive with that statement. I'm aware of the Minister for Boys and Men in Victoria. I would say that they're going about it all wrong. They're focused too much on problems. They're not focused on proactive, positive things that are going to lead men towards healthy masculinity. The focus is on domestic and family violence. The focus is on public drunkenness and abusive behavior. Now, these things are really big problems, but again, you go where you're looking. So we're going to keep on crashing into the Telegraph poll if all we talk about is men have got these problems and we've got to stop men from having these problems. It would be so much better if we said, here are the things that make a positive difference in the lives of men, and we are going to fund and funnel dollars and men in those directions. Let's go in the direction that works. And I'm not saying stop. We actually do need to work on stopping that stuff as well, but we can do two things at once, right? Like, you can rub your tummy and pat your head at the same time. It's doable.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that's a firm belief of ours as well, and something that we've been passionate to discuss more recently as well, as that change has occurred. And it also leads me to wanting to ask you about the whole rewriting the negative stigma of men. I think you made a recent video about this on your Instagram as well. There was some article in the newspaper, and naturally we hear about this negative stigma around men, how, you know, we need to make better men to be better partners and to be better contributors to society and to block out toxic masculinity. And when we read these things, it does nothing but upset me. It does nothing but make me feel hurt and angry as a man, because when I read that and I hear about that negative stigma around a man, it makes me feel like men are inherently negative and we're inherently bad creatures. So it leads me to wanting to know, how do we move past this negative stigma around men? And is it actually a man's job to change it, or is it not a man's job to change it? Because if you ask me, asking a man to change that stigma that is negative around men makes me feel like I need to believe that I am inherently bad in order to change it. But I don't feel like I am an inherently bad man. So therefore, why would I personally feel the need to convince other people that I am not bad? So whose job is it then to change that negative stigma around us as men?
Okay, so first off, it feels really invalidating. And I get why you're saying that. let's also pause and consider who's saying it. You know who's saying it? The media. So they're looking at stats where men are struggling and they're saying, well, this is a news story. Boys are failing at school. Family domestic violence is at high levels, far too high. There's between 1 and 2 women per week who are dying at the hands of men who are violent in the home. A home's supposed to be a place of safety. Women are supposed to be able to go home and feel good, not feel under threat. And these things should not be ignored. I wrote about this in the book. You remember the man or bear TikTok thing that blew up in 2024? For those who are not familiar with it, well, if you haven't heard about it and you listen to the pod and going, what is this man or bear thing? Women were asked on TikTok, if you're walking through the woods, would you prefer to encounter a man or a bear? And the responses that women gave were almost universally, I'd rather a bear. And the reasons why were nothing short of heartbreaking. The reality is, Jeremy, as much as I hear what you're saying, boys and men are disproportionately responsible for so much intergender harm that it's just staggering. And I remember going through, well, what would I rather, and what would I want my daughters to? What I want my daughters to? What if my daughter runs across a man and he's well educated, or he's got a really strong faith background, or is this? And my staff, who are all females, are like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I was sitting there going, oh, I need more time. Help me, give me more information. They're saying it doesn't matter. And I still don't know how to answer that question in an intelligent way, in a way that really works. But here's what I do know. In our current society, because of, literally because of the atrocious behavior of a cohort of boys and men, and it really is atrocious. Some of the stories that I hear, and I'm sure you hear them as well, they just make me put my head in my hands and weep for the future. I'm like, we've got a trust problem. The male gender at an aggregate level, right? At a population level, we have a trust problem. Jeremy, I haven't met you, and Ilan, I haven't met you until today, but you're doing this podcast, and I look at the productive way that you're contributing to society and the work that you're doing, and I'm kind of going, yeah, these guys are probably really good guys, and you're probably givers, not takers, and you're probably adding more value than you're consuming, and you probably do, and you're helping the people around you feel safer and stronger. Like this, that's what the podcast's about. So I would say that when I look around in my community, I look at the men that I spend time with, I look at the way that I was raised and the men that brought me up. I think that most men are actually really, really good men, and we don't hear about them in the media.
That's right.
But we do have a trust problem at an aggregate or population level, because there is a percentage, and I don't think that it's a small percentage, I think it's far too high a percentage of men who do things that cause harm to people and to property. And oh my goodness, the harm is serious. It casts long shadows into the lives of others. Now, men, interestingly, except in the area of family and domestic violence, men are also the victims of crime and are harmed disproportionately highly across the board, except for in that area where females and children are harmed. But let's go back to trust. I just want to unpack this for a second. This to me is really at the core of what you're asking. Definition of trust. Helping the people around you know that you will act in their best interests, right? I trust you and come on this podcast because I believe that you're going to act in my best interests and in the best interests of the people that we're trying to reach through this conversation. But if I thought you had ulterior motives, if I thought you were, I'll say her name. If I thought you were Clementine Ford, she said some really horrible things about men, like, have you killed any men lately today? Now, she says that was a joke, but that's not very funny, right? No. COVID's not killing enough men. And to give her credit, she did apologize and backtrack from what she said. But if Clementine Ford wanted me to be on her podcast, I probably wouldn't say yes. I'd say no. Why? Because I don't think she's going to act in my best interests. I don't feel like it's going to be a productive conversation. So I'm going to stay away from her. And unfortunately, too many people in society are looking at boys and men and saying, can't trust them. Can't trust them. They're not going to act in my best interest. They're going to act in their best interest. It's Friday night. We're at the bar or we're at a party. I've had a few. Can I really trust that guy to give me a drink? There's just too low a level of trust. And that's where the man or the bear thing really blew up. Women are basically saying, don't trust you. Don't trust you. Quick sidebar. Have you guys watched, what's the name of that show? Off Campus?
My girlfriend is obsessed with it.
Right.
I
okay.
haven't watched it.
So I've watched a few tidbits here and there.
Yeah. So not the kind of show that I would typically watch. It's not really consistent with my values and who I am. Nevertheless, I saw so much press about it, and it felt so relevant to the book Boys and the conversation we're having now, that I decided to jump online and watch Off Campus. And I found some of it a little bit jarring, but they're having these conversations. These are boys. These are the studs. These are the hockey legends. Like, they take their shirt off, and every man within 1,000 kilometers goes, "No, I can't compete." Right? Like that's these guys. And well, I actually think that there's some really unhealthy messages in this show. And one of them is, to be a real man, you've got to look like these guys, which is just not realistic. The way that they are generally approaching intimacy and sex, actually, sometimes it's not so much intimacy, but certainly sex, seems to be very, very, very heavily swayed towards, let's build trust before we get intimate. Let's make sure that we're in a relationship such that you can trust that I will act in your best interests before we get our gear off. And I watched scene after scene after scene where these men are modeling precisely what I'm talking about today. And if you're over 18, I actually think that you should watch the show and just learn how to be like that. Because they're saying, we're not going to do this until you feel good about being with me. Or if you feel like you're being pressured here, let's just wait. We don't have to do this now. We can do it next week or next month, assuming the relationship still feels good and you trust me enough. And I'm sitting there going, hallelujah, like, this is the conversation we need to have. If you've got kids who are under about the age of, I'm going to say 16 or 17, it's pretty heavy content, but everyone's got their own values, you decide. But this brings back to, again, trust. The media is making big noise about it because we don't trust men. And we don't trust men because they keep on acting in their own best interest rather than, it's not in their own best interest, let's be honest, but they're not acting in the best interest of the people around them.
You spoke about a couple of things there, and one thing that I think stays with me, and you somewhat alluded to it, but it's the whole idea of emotional intelligence as well. And I've always been a big proponent that young men, especially when they start to navigate intimacy and relationships, one of the most helpful things they can do is almost have a crash course on what EQ, body language, looks like. And I think that's such an important thing, because I think a lot of men nowadays, and if we're going to cite more stats, less men, or rather less men, are having sex nowadays. And I think it's a multifactorial problem. I think the reason that might be the case is because I think, on one hand, men don't have confidence in themselves. I think they're also, again, there's probably the political aspect of it. They don't want to be, I guess, scrutinized or be on the other end of a potential lawsuit, or who knows. There's a myriad of factors. But I think the whole idea with some sort of body language or emotional intelligence education would be quite important. One thing this kind of ties into my next point. A lot of men also don't have role models, effective male role models in their lives. And in your book, I suppose there's something that I wanted to ask you about is, for a man who hasn't grown up, and let's say they're in their early 20s, what are some practical tools that they can start implementing to become a healthy man when they don't have any of that modeled behavior to demonstrate what they should do on a practical level?
So it feels like I'm taking a big left turn from your question, Ilan, but I want to talk about loneliness for a second.
Please.
And the reason for that is, all the stats suggest that our young men are lonelier than they've ever been. And there's this thing called the smartphone theory of everything. Basically, we can blame screens and smartphones for everything that's going on. That's basically what the theory is all about. And I think that there's some argument for that. But here's the thing. Loneliness is a condition where you're sitting on your own and you wish you were with people. I don't think that young men are lonely. They're not sitting in their room playing games or looking at pornography and going, gee, I really miss people right now. I need company. What they're actually doing is they're saying, I'm really comfortable here. I've got my AI chatbot. I've got my AI girlfriend. I've got my pornography. I've got my Uber Eats. I've got my Netflix. I've got everything that I need right here. And so when you cite a stat like young men are engaging in fewer, having less sexual partners and having less sex and being less engaged in life, a lot of them, at least at a superficial level, are kind of going, yeah, I'm okay with that. because this is working for me. Let's just talk about pornography stats for a sec. This blew my mind when I was going through the Australian data and writing the book. The data shows that Australian men males aged 15 to 29 are consuming 34% of them, 34% are consuming explicit content daily in Australia. That's a huge statistic. And a further 53% are consuming it at least on a weekly basis.
Wow.
So 87% of Australian males, 15 to 29, are consuming pornography at least weekly. And I actually think that that's a huge reason that they're not having as much sex. They're happy in their bedroom. They've got their AI. They've got their pornography. They've got their Uber Eats. And there's no risk of rejection. Like if you go to a bar, or if you go to a party, or if you go to a friend's house for a dinner, and you see someone that you're really interested in, you've got to take a risk. And it's possible that you should get a no. You could get a no, sorry. I encourage young men to, so I do a bit of mentoring, I work with some young men here and there, and I encourage them to ask somebody on a date, at least weekly, where they are absolutely unquestionably, without doubt, punching above their weight. And when I'm working with these young men and they look at me and they're like, why would I do that? Like, no, they're so terrified. I'm like, ask her on a date anyway. So let's get clear about what a date is. A date is where you and another person spend some time in one another's company and you get to know them. And I actually argue really, really strongly for platonic dates. No hand-holding, no kissing, no physical contact at all for at least the first 2, 3, maybe even 4 dates. Why? Because it builds trust. You can say to the girl, I really like you, but I'm a big believer in going extremely slowly from a physical point of view. I don't want you to feel any pressure from me at all, physically. I just want you to know that I want to get to know you. And as you get to know me, if you like me, we can build trust and then we can talk about where the relationship goes. But I just want to spend time with you because I find you intriguing and funny and all these things. Like, just build the relationship and build the trust first, right? But anyway, let me go back. So the guys say, no. And they're like, why would I do that? And my answer is, I want you to get rejected. At which point they say, oh, no, I don't want to get rejected. That sounds stupid. And I'm like, no. But here's the thing. You get rejected. And then you wake up the next day and you realize that life is still plugging on. Everything's okay. You can continue to live your life, even though you got rejected. It's not the end of the world. Go for a job that you're not qualified for. Like, maybe she'll say yes. Maybe you'll actually score the gig and they'll decide to give you a go. And you'll be like, oh my goodness, what just happened? You could actually defy the odds. But even if you don't, even if you get rejected, you start to learn that rejection is not the end of the world, which means that you can get up again tomorrow and you can have another crack. You can go in this direction or that direction, and you start to learn more about yourself. You start to become more confident. So when I hear your question, what I'm more interested in is saying, how do we help young men to start to take steps in positive directions? Anxiety is reinforced by avoidance. Let me say that more efficiently, more economically. Avoidance reinforces anxiety, right? So Ilan, you're a psychologist, you know this. You've got somebody who's dealing with anxiety sitting in front of you, and your whole thing is, well, the more you avoid it, the more anxious you'll be about it. And so what a psychologist does is they say, we need to get you to take action and move towards it, because action erodes anxiety. And that's what I want young men to understand. The AI is not doing you any favors. The pornography is not helping you. Sitting in your room is not working for you. Your job is actually to take action. That's what men are designed to do. I talk to so many young people who say, I just don't know what the purpose is. I don't see what the point is. And my response is, if you want to live a purposeful life, you have to do something on purpose. And if you want to feel worthy, you have to do things that are worthwhile. And if you're sitting in your room staring at a screen, there's no purpose in that. And there's nothing that makes you feel worthwhile or worthy about that. Those words, especially worthy, they've got a lot of spiritual overtones and connotations. I'm not talking about it from that point of view. I'm just talking like feeling like, because you are worthy, you are a worthwhile person. But if you don't take action, if you don't do things that make you feel worthwhile, eventually you don't believe it anymore.
It's beautifully said. And I think that's actually the most simplest way I've ever heard someone sum up worthiness, purpose, because again, it's something that we talk about a lot, because unfortunately, those are the two key words. Not to make it sound so dark, but those are the two key words that we often hear about and see as to why men unfortunately do take their lives, because they lack those two things. So hearing you put it like that is beautiful, and it's simple, and it makes it sound really, really proactive and real as to what men can do and what they should strive to do. One thing I wanted to also touch on is the relationship with fatherhood for a lot of men. Now, you made a recent video of you reading from a little excerpt from your book about fatherhood. You got emotional reading it. I got emotional listening to it, and as did Ilan. And I just saw that excerpt was absolutely brilliant, and I wanted to know if you were happy to read that to us on the show, what you read in that video. Otherwise, I'd be more than happy to play it as well, because I think that was just a beautifully read excerpt that everyone should hear.
Yeah, so question without notice. Would you believe I can't find my copy of my book, Boys, but I do have an electronic copy, and it's just over here. So I'm going to disappear from the screen for 1 sec, and I'm going to pick it up. We're so stoked. The book has been going gangbusters. It's been on the Amazon bestsellers list, and
as it should.
I'm so pleased because I
4
feel
years
like
was it? 4 years.
It took about 3.5 to 4 years to write it. Yeah.
That's a PhD.
Oh man, you know what? My PhD was easier. I kid you not. Well, let me just find it here. All right. So it's just here. So at the end of the chapter that I wrote about fathers and fatherhood and role models, I wrote the following, and this is about 1.5 pages. So forgive me, but this will take a bit, and I'm not going to be able to look at the camera because I've got to look at the screen here.
It's okay.
I said, I hope fathers read this book. But the stats suggest that mums read the books and tell their partners about what they read. If you're a mum who knows your partner won't read this book, ask him to read the next part, alone or with you, even if it's the only part he reads. If you're a father, I know life asks a lot of you. Competing demands can be challenging. But imagine a bucket of water. Put your fist in, hold it there. Now take it out. What happens to the water? Short answer, nothing. That's your work, your social life, your sporting life, and everything you do outside of the home. When you remove yourself from those spaces, not much changes. Family is different. Remove yourself from your son's life and nothing can fill the gap you've left. Perhaps other things will flood into that void, but they will never fill it the way you did. You're irreplaceable. I keep hearing men tell me that the most important thing in their lives is their family. But I don't listen to words, I look at actions, and too often action tells a different story. If your bicycle or surfboard or your email account gets more attention than your son, it's time to redirect attention. Dollars are the currency of our economy. Connection is the currency of our relationships. Thriving relationships and healthy boys rely on feeling seen, heard, valued, and accepted. Your son spells love, T-I-M-E. Perhaps you're trying to be present but struggling to connect because your son is withdrawn, interested in things you're not, or full of attitude. It's not me, it's him, you're thinking. I've tried. If he doesn't want to spend time with me, I've got other things I can do. Being a father is a unique role where you're going to get back much less than you give to it. You'll demonstrate your manliness by giving more than you take. That's what healthy men do. They're a bonus. They add value. They provide surplus. They help the people around them feel safer and stronger. Don't give up. Your absence or apathy will be a drain. You'll reduce your son's ability to have a positive impact on the world. He'll be smaller without your involvement. So try again. Find what he cares about and fake interest, or find things you can both enjoy. Keep inviting, keep asking, keep making the effort. Your son is aching for your heart. He wants to know you, but he's clumsy about showing it. He needs second chances, thousands of them. He needs invitations to be in your life, thousands of them. He needs opportunities to connect, thousands of them. He needs a walk around the block with you and the dog, a chat as you sit on the bed late at night, an unexpected early pickup from school to buy a milkshake, a weekend camping trip, a bike ride. He needs an invite to jump in the car and zip down to the hardware shop with you to grab that thing, or to the department store for that other thing. He needs you even when you're not getting it right and he's being difficult. He needs to see how you handle disappointment, how you navigate relationships, how you deal with vulnerabilities and fears. Forget some polished version of masculinity. He doesn't need a superhero. He needs you. And to him, you are a superhero, believe it or not. So work on less judgment and criticism and on more real conversations. While fishing trips and football games are valuable, the magic often happens in unplanned moments, driving together, working on a project, sitting on the back step, watching the sunset, sharing a muffin, and listening to him. Always listening. The thing teens tell me they want most from their dads is for him to listen. And the thing boys tell me they love the most about their dads is they can tell him anything because he's chill. Create those moments where your son feels safe enough to ask questions that matter, and you might have the chance to do what dads love, to share wisdom. Not, oh gosh, there you go. I'm 50 years old and I'm starting to get weepy. Not from having all the answers, but from having wrestled with the questions. I could go on. I think that's enough.
Appreciate you sharing that. It got me emotional as well because I know this book and that excerpt is more for fathers, but I think of both my mum and dad. And the reason I do is because I've been thinking a lot about the idea of having someone's best interests at heart. And I think aside from, your partner and your family, your actual parents, for the most part, something I've noticed, and maybe something I've only appreciated as I've gotten a little bit older, I really just appreciate that their love is unconditional, that no matter what I do, they might not like the behavior, but they'll still love me and they want my best interests at heart. And maybe it's the fact that I've moved out of home in the last month or so. A lot of that is starting to kind of bubble to the surface. And it started to make me really, really appreciate the role that my mum and dad had in my own life. And I think when you read that, it really spoke to that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Your parents are very patient. I couldn't handle if my kids were still hanging around at home in the late 20s. I'm like, get out of here, go on with your life. They're very, very good to you.
I couldn't afford it. All the studying with psych, as you'd know, it's a long degree. Couldn't.
It's a mission.
But now we're on the other side of it. So.
Well, Justin, you mentioned a little thing there called sharing a muffin in a little excerpt with your dad, and muffins are a big part of our show. It's a pity we're not in person today because we like to finish off our show by asking our guest a sweet spot and then gifting them a muffin in person, which we often share with them actually. So we'll say it virtually today, and we'll gift you a muffin virtually today, and hopefully we can have a conversation in person one day and share muffins together. But on that note, what is your sweet spot? And what I mean by that is what is a recent moment in your life that is a sweet moment that you get those warm, fuzzy feelings in your stomach and you can look at with positive memories and experience?
We have a tradition in our home. So I've got 4 kids that are now over 18 and 2 who are still very much dependents. One's 12 and one's 16. And we have a tradition that on a Sunday night, the whole family comes together. I'm fortunate that they all live close enough that we can do that. And we have our Sunday feast. Sometimes it's pizza out of the Gosney oven on the back deck. Sometimes it's barbecue. Sometimes it's a roast. And while we're all sitting at the dining table and we're eating whatever fabulous food we've cooked up that afternoon, we ask everybody to go around the table and just share what's happened in their lives recently that they appreciate, that they've recognized and experienced some gratitude for. We call it grateful things. And it's just a highlight. My 2.5-year-old granddaughter says what she's grateful for. I get to listen to my 6 kids tell me what they're grateful for. I hear my 2 sons-in-law share what they're grateful for. And my favorite part of that, one of them's an electrician, the other one's a builder. They're big, muscly, blokey blokes. Like I'm the academic with the PhD, with the soft hands. These guys are they're stronger than I'll ever be. And they're both like 6'3" or 6'5" or something. Like they're huge. I'm 5'8" 3/4. I never even made it to 5'9", and I feel so small when I'm around them, like from a physical size point of view. But they're not just giants physically. They've got this wonderful emotional depth. They know how to help the people around them feel safer and stronger. And I'll listen to them as they'll talk about what they're grateful for. And like there have been times where these man monsters at my table have been weeping as they've expressed their appreciation for the good things, the richness in their life. And then my wife will share what she's grateful for, and I always go last because I don't know, that's just how we've got the tradition. That's what we always do. And this is a weekly reflection. It's a weekly sweet spot, a weekly warm fuzzy that it's so grounding, and it just brings you back to the stuff that matters most. It's not about the size of your bank account. It's not about where you live. It's not about, I don't know, how big your shoulders are, whether you've got lats and you can do muscle ups. It's just about appreciating the relationships and the people in your life and making sure that they feel it, expressing it. It's so purposeful. It's so meaningful. That's my sweet spot.
That is one of my favorite sweet spots that I've ever heard on the podcast. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Dr. Justin Coulson, where can people best find you, and what is the full name of your book, and where can people go and buy that book? So
probably the easiest place to find me is my podcast. I mean, if you're listening to Big Brothers here, Big Bros, I reckon you probably like podcasts. So if you're a parent, the Happy Families podcast, it's the most downloaded parenting podcasts in Australia. And I share a little, like a 15-minute drop every day to just help you to stay focused on being a great parent. So that would be the easiest place to find me. The book is called Boys, Building Strong Young Men from the Inside Out. Because I want boys to be strong. I want them to be able to do chin-ups and push-ups and feel good in themselves. But if we only focus on looks maxing, if we only focus on the outside, where it's the wrong way. We need to start on the inside. We've got to build character. We've got to build up that bonus, surplus value, giving, not taking kind of stuff. We've got to build up that moral wisdom and courage, a willingness to choose what's hard over what's easy, because we know it's going to make us better. So the book's out, and if people are raising kids, that'd be amazing. It will change your life.
Dr. Justin Coulson, thank you so much for joining the Big Bros podcast today.
Love being with you guys. Thanks, Ilan. Thanks, Jeremy.